Thank you all for joining us today in the myFootpath series. Some great research and findings going on. Today, we're talking about creative financing strategies for adult online students. And we're joined by three panelists, Dr. Dawn Medley from Missouri State University, Dr. Nicholas Pruitt from Stony Brook University, and JT Allen, founder and CEO of myFootpath. Real quick little background on the project. This research study was conducted with roughly 30 different universities led by Don Hostler. JT and I were able to participate in this qualitative work as well. And we had three findings. One of them was that in order to help adults online students succeed, we really need to focus upon creative financing for those students. Another one had to do with providing essentially concierge level service through the entire sort of student life cycle, if you will. And those, as well as the deliberate planning of online enrollments with goals, benchmarks, and all those sorts of things was critical. And we'll speak to those two other topics moving down the road. 2 weeks ago, we had Don Hostler join us for a nice conversation on the methodology and the background. So we're excited to share our exemplars, best practices, if you will, today. So the white paper is available at the myfootpath.com website. But with Dawn and Nick here today, we'll be able to really kind of get under the hood and look at what they've been doing. And JT will be able to bring some perspectives, having worked with a great number of institutions, many of whom you can see right there. Moving into the study, just for a little bit of context real quick, over 43 million adults presently have started studies in post-secondary education, but didn't complete it. And then we've got another 10 million on top of that who were admitted into universities and colleges, but didn't start. Tremendous population. We are going through a number of different headwinds today as far as, let's call it federal policies or suggested policies. And certainly we've got the enrollment cliff here and some general sentiment on the part of learners as to the value of higher education. So the numbers are significant. As we go through this, please post your questions on the Q&A bar, and I'll do my best to get to them. In getting right into the meat of the matter, our next slide here is discussing some of the things going on. So, Nick, why don't I launch the first question over to you, which is, can you share with us a little bit of perspective of some of the headwinds on what's going on, what's keeping you up at night as you're helping to administrate financial aid to students?
Yeah, Luke, thanks so much. I think some of the big challenges that we're facing right now really relate to implementation of a new congressional bill. You probably heard it referred to as the Big Beautiful Bill. Us in the financial aid, there are a number of significant impacts related to students attending school, whether it's undergraduate students or maybe interested in having a parent take out a parent loan. There are some new limits that will take place starting in summer of 26. To graduate student loans, having limits on those, and elimination of a graduate plus loan starting in summer of 26. Us in the financial aid community are spending a lot of time trying to collect all the appropriate information. The Department of Education recently released a process called negotiated rules making, where this fall they're going to try to figure out how to implement some of those rules and put those regulations into effect. And I think there's two 1 week long sessions in the fall, rolling into like December and January as well, to try to figure out some of these limitations. But I think it really has an impact on financial aid for students that are really coming back for their graduate education. The federal loan limits are still in place. The undergraduate subsidized or unsubsidized student loans are still there. The challenge really has to do with the Graduate Plus loan, which was an additional loan that graduate students could take out to help finance their education, that went a little bit beyond what the graduate loan limits are at that $138,500 level. And so we're doing our best to communicate that to students who are coming back to school to maybe work on their master's degree to try to make those advancements in their careers, or even some of those undergraduate, adult learners coming back, just making sure that we can navigate and share with them what the federal loan limits are if they're trying to borrow for the cost of their education. And we're advising students to really pick the institutions that are going to be affordable to them, and the programs that are going to be affordable with these new limits. So I think that really makes a difference for students there.
Thank you, Nick. Dawn, there are a tremendous number of, let's go back to what Nick just suggested, policies and things, many of them generated really toward the traditional undergraduate student, be it a first-time full-time student or a transfer student. But we've got this tremendous market of adults out there. Can you provide a little context for the viewers onto generally what's available and what's not so readily available for the adults?
Well, first and foremost, like I draw a striking example. Adults tend to not have guidance counselors assisting them. So that's the very first thing, right? So most of our traditional students coming out of the high school and then also even coming out of the community college, they would have what I consider college launch or navigator counselors helping them figure out all of the systems. Our adult students don't have that. So whether we're looking at a nun, somebody who didn't choose to go to college straight out of high school, or we're looking at one of those, my passion project, one of those adults who started college and didn't actually finish, there's some additional headwinds and some burdens there for them because we're never quite sure what led them to stop out the first time. And so even if they feel like they've addressed that issue or they've coped with it or they figured out a solution, they may not know then how to get back engaged with higher education. And so I think one of the most important things we can do as higher ed folks in the financial aid world is kind of knock down those barriers before they get to them. So I love the work that this study kind of brought to the forefront when we're talking about it, because adult students have a lot of different avenues to help pay for their education, and graduate student loans is just one of them. And I know as we go, we'll talk about, employee tuition reimbursement programs. We'll talk about, the opportunity for veterans benefits. They're still eligible for federal financial aid dollars as well, and they may actually qualify for a Pell Grant. So there's lots of different financing opportunities for students. But I think a lot of times institutions, we haven't really stepped forward to actually be that adult student college navigator that they need. And so that would be one of the things that I think when you're doing this work and myFootpath is doing this work, to really make sure that it's a clear on-ramp, because we know these adult students already found the off-ramp, right? So we know they already left higher ed or they didn't choose to get onto it. So we want to make sure that they have an easy way to get back, that we've knocked down those barriers, and that we are helping them make good choices. Nick alluded to that regarding their major, making sure that it's a major that meets certain income or earning potential, because that's going to be another metric that we have to work through with this new legislation. And so really advising adults and what works for them, and then also how the institution can support them. So I feel like that's our next big kind of iteration in higher education for these students.
Thank you. JT, in addition to the findings in the study, I know you work with a significant number of institutions. Can you speak to the prioritization they may or may not give generally to provide financing for adult students?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a couple of things. I mean, one is to kind of piggyback on Dawn's point, it's confusing, right? There's lots of different options, there's different forms, you haven't done it forever, you're looking at it and you feel like you're reading a different language. So just kind of getting, the students through kind of step one, right? Which one do I use? How do I start? Like, is critical. And, and many institutions can kind of do that if they prioritize that work, right? But then we see that then there's usually another layer to it of, well, how do I kind of put these different options for payment and for, some creative financing together to kind of address certain populations. And I think that's kind of the sweet spot in our work anyways, is sort of that focus on, well, how do you not only make it easy for the student, but what can you combine with the school resources, whatever they may have, to make that financial burden a little bit less?
Thank you. Our next slide gets a little bit into some of the best practices that came as a result of the study. Dawn, one of the hallmarks of your work is being able to provide a means by which students can afford to participate in higher education. In looking at these 6 points here, could you offer some insights as to how, when you go in and lead an enrollment operation, you may prioritize which ones come first, who the different stakeholders are, and so on?
So one of the first things that I tend to do when I started a new institution, and I appreciate that because I'm in my third day at Missouri State. So I begin to assess and look at what are our internal policies, right? And so how are we set up to support students? And so when you look at institutional and state financial guardrails, that very last one, some institutions, private and then public, they have very different systems for who holds on to past due debt, who do you have to pass that on to the state for collection? Is that something that goes against, your overall fiscal health of the institution? At what stage do you write off that debt? And so then you can begin to do it. And then who has the authority at your institution to decide what's your hold threshold, right? So if a student owes this amount of money, how do we either prevent them from registering, or do we allow them to register, but then they have to be on a payment plan? So who and where do all of those policies reside? And so my thing is I always try and seek out who has the ability to change those policies. And so I think going back to, JT's point about things can be confusing and we talk about for adults not having guidance, making sure that we're knocking down those barriers before they get to them. So if you have a hold on your campus where you don't allow a student to register, you've already locked them out. Right. And so they may give up, they may walk away. And so how are you set up to communicate with them frequently and make sure that you're communicating clearly? And then how are you explaining the simple things that we take for granted? How are you explaining that you have to do a FAFSA every year? How are you explaining to a student where they can tap into their veterans benefits or how they can connect with their employer? One of my favorite programs and things that I see people do is really working directly with the employers so that the adult student or even, the 18-year-old who's working for an employer who will provide tuition remission, that it's a direct pay from the employer to the institution. And I love that because not a lot of people have the money that they can outlay on the front end and then get reimbursed. And then you also have what I consider some draconian policies in place at some employers where if you're not taking the class that they support or in a major that they want, or the student doesn't get a C, then they won't reimburse the class. And as somebody who has a D on her undergrad transcript, I don't think you should do that because we can go on and be relatively productive adults even with a D on our transcript. So that's one of the things that I like to work with employers and try and help negotiate around because again, you're just easing that path for those students to come to your institution.
Fantastic. Nick, in your experience, lots of folk at the institutions want to be able to say, hey, you prospective student are able to afford attending here. What might be some tidbits you can share on how you prepare others at an institution to be able to address any of these topics?
Yeah, I think the first piece is really that analysis paralysis. There's a little bit of logistics that take place in going back to school. We start classes here on the 25th, so we're about 3 weeks out from classes starting. We're having students that are calling now asking how to get admitted, how to get readmitted. I think understanding what the process is, understanding the timeline is important. When we talk about students going back to school, I think there are a lot of extra benefits that maybe they aren't taking into consideration. So here at Stony Brook, all of our staff are eligible to take one course for free per term. That's a great way to really cut down on the costs of either completing an undergraduate degree or starting and completing a graduate degree. And I think it's knowing about those resources. Here in financial aid, we try to direct the folks to the right areas and to really get them started on that process. What we also come across on students who are coming back, I think Don mentioned getting a poor grade in school. You can recover from that. But I think there's also some roadblocks that may be in there. Maybe you've taken out student loans and you haven't made payments on the student loans. Maybe the last time you left here, you were academically dismissed. You've gone and you've started living a little bit of what your life is, and now you're ready to come back to school. That's a great way to just get a fresh restart. You need to be the students need to be upfront and kind of honest about that when they come in. Here's the issues that I had before. I'm ready to be back and be a productive student so that I can complete a degree. We know students who graduate with a degree earn somewhere between, $2 and $3 million more in their lifetime than somebody who doesn't have a college degree. And I think those are important points when we start talking about student loan defaults. Are they making payments on their loans? What do they need to get into good graces with that? What is the actual cost of the program that they're attending? Earlier, I mentioned the changes in the federal student aid program. There are some graduate programs that run $60,000 or $70,000 a year. Those are going to be very tough. Don and I are both at public institutions that have a low cost of education. Student loans are going to be easily affordable to cover what those costs are at both of our institutions for most graduate programs or to complete an undergraduate degree. So think about the schools that you're looking at. I think those are all important pieces. And then, don't be afraid to contact the financial aid department. I think a lot of people are scared to call financial aid. They're scared to call academic advising. We're here to help, and we're here to help students complete degrees, whether that's a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, or even going on for a doctoral degree. That's what our goals are. And if students have been out of school for a while, things have definitely changed when it comes to the FAFSA process, federal student aid, but we're here to help them really navigate what that process is going to be.
Thanks, Nick. JT, you've again, in working with so many schools, you've seen different price points, if you will. Can you speak a little bit as to how an adult, returning student online may not be paying the same amount of tuition and fees as a traditional first-time full-time student?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, it's important as a returning adult student to really look at the tuition costs in your program, because sometimes you see like the one that's most prominent on websites is often the undergrad resident price.
Right.
But sometimes when you come back online, it may have a different price. It may have a different way. Sometimes you're credited back, some of the tuition and different forms of waivers. So it really can get complicated, but you definitely want to look. And when you don't know, ask, because that's what the offices are there to help you really get through. Some people think like, oh, I should know it all. I tell you, I'm in the business and I'm confused by every single site I look at. It takes me a good 20 minutes to get like, okay, what do I pay? And I think it's the same thing with a student. And you have this like twinge of like, wait, I can't even figure this out. Don't worry about it. Call the office, figure it out. They're there to help. They'll walk you through it with some precision. And certainly, in our work, that's what we try to do as well with students. But don't be afraid to ask.
Thanks.
Luke, if I could just add, because we've talked a lot about the institutional supports here, there are a lot of community-based organizations that are also engaged in supporting adult students who are returning. And so again, your institution where you're looking, they'll know of some of those resources, but a lot of community-based organizations, like we've seen a lot of things happening with Goodwill Industries out of Detroit, the Kauffman Scholars out of Kansas City. So a lot of different foundations, Lumina has been assisting adult students, Kresge has. So people are waking up outside of higher ed, knowing that non-traditional students are really going to be a support for the workforce needs that we're going to have in the future. So I think those are great options for students as well.
Great points, Don. Nick, a question just came in I want to send to you. And the question is, do adult students tend to go through the verification process to a greater degree than a traditional student? And if so or not, how might you speak to those students before they enroll in what to expect in this process?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So what I will say with technological advancements, the Department of Education isn't selecting as many people for the verification process when it comes to filing the FAFSA as they used to. On our campus, we're a campus of 27,000. Last year, I think we had maybe 300 students. If we go back maybe 4 years or so, we were selecting 3,500, 4,000 students. And I don't think it's disproportionate to the number of adult learners that are really coming back. What we are seeing, though, especially under the new federal administration, is a need to verify the identity of students that are coming back. And so at our institution, we are seeing an increase in the number of students that have maybe been at a number of schools, so maybe 2 schools in the last 3 years, and then they're maybe coming to our institution. The Department of Education is asking us just to verify that they are a true student, and I think that's their efforts in cutting down on fraud. For us, that's as simple as coming into our office or scheduling a Zoom interview to show us a copy of your federally or state issued ID. We collect that information and then we can kind of move it along. So I think that helps solidify what the problem is. Yeah.
Great insights on that. Thanks for answering the question.
Sure.
In moving into our next slide, it segues right from your point, Dawn, about collaboration, and really a significant finding in the studies across the institutions was that we've got to work internally, but we've got to work externally as well. One can't happen without the other. Dawn, again, you've developed extensive partnerships at each place you've worked. Can you highlight a few instances with some industry or community-based organizational partnerships that have been successful?
Yeah. So, Luke, I'm going to go back. I'm going to talk about Detroit, right? I'm going to talk about Wayne State and Warrior Way Back, because it was, I think, transformative in a lot of the adult student debt mitigation. I also think it's because that's what I did my dissertation on. And so I lived and breathed it for so long. But what was great about that program is we did have institutional buy-in. So I had a provost at the time in Keith Whitfield. We had a chief financial officer, and they really saw how we could create a program that was a win for the students, but also a win for the institution. And I think too often we aren't going into it with our how can everybody benefit kind of lens. And so we did all of that work as part of the Lumina Talent Hub. And so we were partnering with the Detroit Chamber of Commerce, who has the Detroit Promise program and are trying to get more students going to higher education. And Wayne State at the time previously had about a 26% graduation rate. And so that meant that there were 74% of our students who had started with us but not completed. And what we found was, while some of them were academically ineligible, we had a Fresh Start program where students could come in and they could actually, get rid of those credits, and we gave them an academic kind of clean slate. And I know JT's worked with a lot of schools who have programs like this. So we had that under control. What we didn't have under control is we had a very low threshold for students to owe us a debt. And we had no way, if a student owed us a debt, for them to really re-engage with us. So we created the Warrior Way Back program, which allowed us to kind of set that debt aside, really get students engaged. And where that partnership came in and where it was really fantastic was we replicated that program at other institutions in the area. And so I always encourage educational leaders to work with each other because Wayne State was a primary competitor of Oakland University, and we were right there together and we were competing for the same demographic of students. But it didn't hurt me at all as an institution if Oakland was able to re-enroll their students who had started with them, right? And so we were able to provide them all of our materials, all of our, ROI analysis that we did, and they were able to replicate the Warrior Way Back program into the Golden Grizzlies graduate program. And so we did it with them. We worked with Henry Ford Community College and that. So that was an opportunity. I referred to it as kind of an educational ecosystem because it also allowed us to expand with our industry partners and the community colleges. Because if a student was coming back to Wayne State, but maybe we could get them involved with Henry Ford Community College, they could earn an associate's degree along the way. And then their employer would, if they had an associate's degree, pay tuition reimbursement for them to get the baccalaureate. So we really began to see everybody as kind of working for the student and for the entire kind of Detroit metro area because we were lacking in skilled labor for positions. We didn't have enough folks with bachelor's degree. And so that then went one more level. I know I'm over my time, I'm sure, but it went one more level where we went out to industry and we talked to like Henry Ford Health Systems and said, hey, what if you didn't have people take a class and reimburse, but you just billed us and and you paid as a third party? Could we do that? And so everybody was rowing in the same direction. And I think that is why, we were named a talent hub and why Kresge saw fit to invest a lot of money in all of this work in adult re-engagement. And now, that's it's kind of snowballed, which is really exciting.
Great insights. Nick, in thinking about these relationships, can you provide some advice to our viewers on how does the billing cycle work, and how do you overlay aid and applying holds and things? How do we make sure that these collaborations aren't interrupting the student's enrollment cycle?
I think, the most important part is being able to get students enrolled and keep students enrolled. And I think one of the other most important things is for students to pay their bills. And those two do bump into each other on a regular basis. Different institutions have different thresholds, and we do our best to really review what the hold amounts are, where students are, and try to identify what the barriers are. So if a student has, $100 or $500 in a past due balance hold, we do our best not to limit that enrollment. If a student owes, $5,000 or $10,000, then that's a different conversation that we need to have with the students. And I think a lot of times those are on a case-by-case basis. Here in the state of New York, if you fail to pay a state institution after a certain amount of time, then we are required by state law to turn that over to the Attorney General's office. And that's where things can get a little bit more complex here. That's where state income tax refunds are withheld to pay that balance, and it can kind of get a little bit messy. We do our best to do outreach to students to provide them what their opportunities are, to really cover those balances early and often. So, during the fall semester, when October rolls around and it's time to enroll for spring, we in the financial aid office do a lot of outreach to students that maybe haven't taken out loans, that have a balance that the loan would take care of, to try to be a proactive solution to students. We can't make students take loans, but we want to make sure that they have the best information that they have available to make sure that they can complete their degree. And, I mentioned the value return on investment of a college degree. In this country, we don't really value a student that has 90 credit hours. We look for that degree, and job requirements are based on that degree piece. And so getting students over that finish line is an important piece. We as an institution also have the ability to try to pull some of those funds back if they have past due balances, to have good conversations to see what we can do to lift those holds so that we can get students enrolled and come up with a viable solution to make sure that they can get paid and they can get back enrolled. So I think just being open and honest. That also takes the students taking that step forward and not being scared to contact their financial aid office. Here, we're going to start a new program within the next few months where we're going to embed a couple of financial aid advisors in our academic advising unit. We're going to call them financial aid and wellness advisors. And what their primary duty is to make sure that students are continuing enrolled. We want to increase our retention rates, and we want to make sure that financial aid isn't a barrier to that, and having some personnel in those offices when they're doing advising appointments and students are saying, hey, financial aid is my biggest concern. Sometimes they say financial aid is their biggest concern and they don't owe a balance. What they really mean is they can't afford to not work and go to school. And so that's a different conversation with students.
Thank you.
And I just want to add just a little bit to that, a little bit of context. All we hear in the press is how student loan debt has negatively impacted students in their lives. We never hear about the students who borrow complete degrees and improve their lives. You'll also notice that we don't hear a lot about bad credit card debt. And we have many, many, many more people who have been negatively impacted by credit card debt, right? But that's not an industry that we've chosen to target in the US. Higher ed has become the target for, all student loan debt is bad debt, and that's not accurate or true. We encourage people to borrow for furniture, for trips, for cars, for this. none of those things are going to appreciate in value, right? A college education, nobody can take that away. And so I think that where we're seeing students when they're talking about the fear of borrowing or financial aid or those kinds of things, we've had some of that done to us, but then in higher ed, we haven't really stood up and said, listen, why aren't you talking about the credit card industry? Why aren't you talking about the auto loan industry? Those things aren't going to improve people's lives. And so I think we need to be a little more vocal and a little more fanatical about that, and not just sit back and have people talk about, the evils of student loans. Student loans are amazing and they provide a lot of opportunity for many students to go to school.
That's a great point, Dawn. Thanks so much. A true investment into Nick's earlier point. The credentialing is certainly what gets folk to be able to enjoy and appreciate those benefits that come along with higher education. So to that point, a certification, an associate's degree, a bachelor's, a master's, all of those matter more than the number of credits completed. JT, when an institution's looking to form a relationship with an industry, I think good advice would be don't just go out there and look for any industry. Are there a few industries that more adult students tend to gravitate to study than others?
Sure. Well, I mean, we see generally with adult students, they tend to return like the market for online students. And so, business is the largest, then healthcare, then criminal justice, and then IT in that order. And so as you look at anything about partnerships, that's usually where they'll fall, right? Is kind of where they're earning a degree. There's just natural tie-ins. We would sort of take a step back. I mean, just on this sort of conversation, there's a couple things I would mention. I mean, one is when we do our work with students and we're really thinking about, having conversations, it's the phone first organization. So we're always trying to talk with that person. And the reason is because we're trying to we're trying to make that point of the value of education and how it necessarily ties to their career. And it's kind of similar with a partnership, right? I mean, you gotta tie it to, well, what's the value, right? But that's kind of what we do over and over again. And I think sometimes is lost, and as you mentioned, Don, in the media, is that value of the education. What can it do for you? So in every single conversation that we're having, on the phone with an individual, that's at the forefront. And then, they can usually figure out, how to get on a payment plan. But if they don't want to, they don't see a value in it, they're not going to do it. Right. So, or less are going to do it. Right. So that's kind of what kind of remains at the forefront, and it kind of goes throughout, as we go through.
Fantastic. We're going to talk next about a little more of the internal work on this next slide here. And that has to do with some of these points here, and that's really engaging the folk at the institution. Dawn, over to you. When you're setting up some of these significant relationships, who are some of the key stakeholders at an institution with whom you need to work to get these relationships rolling ahead forward?
So I think that the easiest answer is there's no particular person, right? So what you're looking for is you're looking for a campus leader who has street cred on their campus, right? They have to be somebody that other people listen to, respect. They can be somebody that people get excited to be around or to work with. But it could be anyone in your leadership, but they're going to have agency, and they're going to have to be able to empower people within the organization to make a quick decision. So we do get a little bit of a reputation in higher ed that, we are not motorboats, we are cruise ships, and we take a long time to change and a long time to set a new course. So I think it's important to find people who can be catalysts and can bring other folks along. And so at some institutions, that may be your provost, right? Because they're looking at enrollments and gaining. It could be your chief business officer, your chief finance officer. I've had it be the president or chancellor at different institutions. You know, if I'm on a campus, I'm saying it's your enrollment management person, right? Because I'm going to be out there trying to hustle and find additional student populations to meet our enrollment goals, finding ways that we can support them and graduate them and get them through. But it's really clear to me that it's not just one person. So they need to kind of bring together and coalesce around this mission. But you know, I've had right now at Wayne State the bursar, Patrick Byrne. We did a session with him a while back. He is a champion for this program. He totally gets it. And bursars are not usually the folks going, yeah, let's forgive some of that debt. Let's give people another educational chance, right? And Patrick does that because he understands it's a huge ROI for the institution. And so once you can get people to see the benefit financially, and then you get people to see the benefit for the individual students, right? Because you have changed your relationship with these students when they see you as a partner. And so both JT, you know, he said they're a phone first organization and it's about the relationship. You know, Nick is encouraging people to come in and talk to financial aid. This is all while we got into this work, right? Was to support and walk beside students. And so the more that you have folks on campus, no matter their role, who understand that they are enrollment and retention specialists and that they are the graduation champions, you're going to be golden. And that's what you want to do. And so you get businesses to buy in because they need employees. You get community-based organizations to buy in because once somebody is giving to a community, they're not taking from a community, right? So if they can be a resource contributor as opposed to somebody who's subscribing to resources, it's much better for the community at large. And so it's pretty easy to get buy-in once people understand how it works and once people understand the value of re-engaging these adult students.
Thanks. Nick, I love Dawn's analogy about higher education being this gigantic ship, you know, and certainly in my experience running enrollment management operations, we've got to know the water depth and know, you know, what other ships are in the area and all sorts of things to really plan ahead. Can you share some insights as to the importance of timing? So if I want to set up an industry partnership between my university and some firm or a nonprofit. When should we have these discussions, and when's it kind of a little too late for the upcoming academic year?
Yeah, you know, I think I love the cruise ship analogy. I think we're all familiar with a cruise ship that maybe had a small rudder, and it does take those ships a little while to turn. You know, we can't turn on a dime. So if you come to our office on the 1st of August and you say you would like to bring in a class of 20 students for the fall, that's a little bit too late. You know, if we're talking about industry partnerships and we're talking about funds transfers, sometimes we can do these really quick. We had one where we had some discussions in February. The industry partner gave us funds in April, and we're bringing in a class this fall. So we were able to be that kind of nimble to meet what their needs are. And I think we're looking at expanding the partnership. And I think, you know, is that quick? Is that slow? I think it depends on what your point of view is and how you're kind of looking at the problem. But trying to identify resources, I think, is the most important part. You know, who are the industries in your area that maybe have resources that could help support students? Are they supporting their employees? Are they supporting the dependents of employees? Are they looking to support the community at large? I think those are great questions to start that. You know, what is the availability of funds? Is it one-time funds? Is it going to be reoccurring? You know, I think it's great to say that you're going to support 10 students, but supporting them for one semester is one thing, supporting them for 4 years and their full degree is another. Are we bringing in other cohorts behind that? Are we going to backfill? Maybe you have a student who doesn't persist. Can we use those funds on another student? Those are all the questions that, you know, we're going to have as part of the process. But I think those are questions that are easily answered with those resources. And, ultimately, I always ask, what is the goal? What is the goal of your organization? How do you want this presented? And then what is the outcome? And I think our outcome always is getting students to have degrees. And so whether that's taking a first year student all the way through the process, whether that's bringing back, an adult learner who hasn't completed their degree, and so we're getting them either a bachelor's degree credential or we're bringing them back for a master's program. All of those are little steps that are along the way that we can be instrumental on campus. Reach out, have those conversations, and we can move forward.
Thanks. Dawn, we had a question come in, and it has to do with what makes a good industry partner. So what is it that you may be looking for from a partner as far as how much financing they might provide, what types of academic majors they support, and things of that nature?
So what I'd say is for an industry partner, first off, we need them to understand for an adult, it is basically what's the quickest path to the bachelor's degree. And so the example that I would give you is we may have somebody who is, 18 hours away from an English degree. And maybe the business really needs somebody with an MBA, right? And that's really what they're looking for. Let us as an institution get that student out the door with the baccalaureate degree. On the way toward that baccalaureate degree, maybe we can help them pick up some of those prereqs for an MBA, and then we can get them into the MBA. But it's very short-sighted to say, oh no, we won't pay for an English degree. Because the worst thing you can do to an adult student is be like, well, your credits are worthless. They're just not going to do, right? So let us adapt. And so one of the things that one of my previous institutions we were able to do is we created a bachelor's in business that was very general. And then we were creating a bachelor's in health industry, right? And so people could take those degrees that were more general, but we made sure that you had the prereqs then to move on to an MBA, or you had the prereqs to move on to a master's of public health or a master's of health service administration. And so those master's degrees, very attractive to our industry partners. So the best thing an industry partner can do is sit down and listen and talk with us, right? Because sometimes you have people who are coming in from HR or different things saying, okay, it has to do these things. And when you sit with them and you ask, why does it have to do these things? They're coming at it from a scarcity or fear mindset where they're like, well, if we get them a degree that doesn't work with us, they're just going to leave. And I'm like, but think if you help get an employee a degree and you say, hey, I see you. I see all this past educational experience you have. I want to honor that. And then I also see a future with you and our company in this degree. It's a very different relationship than just shutting the door on the front end. So I would say flexibility, discussion, dialogue, and a true partnership, right? Those are going to be the best industry partners for higher ed.
Great, thanks. JT, I've been fortunate to go with you to visit several universities and have very frank discussions about their operations. And one point that arose in quite a number of the participants' feedback was sort of the frankness that's provided when the prophet from outside the community comes in and asks the questions. Can you speak to a little bit about your observations in being able to do these audits or solicit voices that otherwise might go unheard?
Sure. Well, yeah. So what we do in our work is we go in and, we give it a name, of course, right? So we call it an opportunity assessment when we go in and look at an institution. But Dawn alluded to a lot of the things with the industry partners, right? Ask them. And so we really try to get at, well, why are you going at a particular policy or situation the way you are, right? And we do that in a way that's collaborative, right? There's lots of reasons, right? Sometimes there are very good reasons. Other times it's that nobody's looked at it in 20 years, right? So our goal is to really come in with, sort of an open mind, share what we see, in the industry, but then also just help to ask the questions of, hey, did you ever think about it through this lens? Well, what about this lens? And what we find is that many times they probably have thought about some of it, but the work and the value is really bringing like people across departments together to actually talk about, well, yeah, we've thought about it and here's what it is, but why is it that way in your department and my department, and then like connect dots. And that's really where the value comes through, is that, you know, the silos that don't always talk to each other, they get around the table and they ask each other that question, well, why do you come at it this way? And then they're like, oh, well, let's just change it. You know, so and it's pretty powerful. It's pretty powerful.
Super. This next slide, I'll just very briefly mention. There are outside of course, working with the academic units to develop industry partnerships, and of course, aligning closely with enrollment management, with financial aid being one of the important pillars there. The grants office, and there exist a number of grants out there that can be pursued, funding based upon workforce needs, upon specific populations and so forth, but certainly an opportunity as well to be able to generate some access to some funds that I might otherwise go unresourced. I want to spend a little time on this last slide coming up here about flexible solutions that work for your institution. Dawn, you've shared in this study quite a number of creative ways. One of them that kind of sticks with me was a concept I'll just call it kind of paying forward. But if you could illustrate for the viewers a little bit of some of the innovative work that you've done in that regard.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So really, it is kind of a pay it forward scholarship, right? And so one of the ways that you can get around the tuition reimbursement that a lot of employers use is by scholarshiping that first class for your adult students who are returning. So let's say, for example, a class costs, $750. So costs $750. So you as an institution say, hey, guess what? We're not going to bill you for that class. We're going to give you a scholarship for that class. So you come, you take that class, and then you submit to your employer, and we'll work with you and make sure that you get reimbursed then for that class. And then what your student can do is they can use that $750 that they're reimbursed to pay for the next semester's class, right? And so you do that for however many classes it takes. Let's take it 10 classes, right? And so at the end, when the student graduates and they're getting reimbursed for that last class, you have already asked them, hey, and we're going to need you then to contribute that back. We're going to give you credit for a charitable donation to the institution. So you have graduated and you've become a donor, right? And so that's really exciting. And then we're going to use the scholarship that you just awarded, and we're going to give it to a student just like you for next semester so they can come. And people are like, oh, well, what if they don't turn around and give it? Well, if they don't, you had, 9 classes that they paid for already. Okay. So you lost one. All right. That's okay. But the other thing is, we've never had a student who didn't choose to pay, right? Because they know the opportunity they were given, they see what's happening for them, the services they've received, and then they a lot of times want to pay it forward. It's just like what happens when you go through the drive-through and somebody pays for you, then you pay for the car behind you, right? So it's that same kind of concept, and students really get inspired by it. Your development and advancement folks love you because you've increased the number of your alumni giving by students giving back to the institution at that point. And it works really well.
Thanks. Nick, any additional creative solutions you've come across in your career?
I think the biggest one is just trying to recruit back students and seeing what your finance office is willing to do to help get the students back. Is it a short-term loss? Let's say somebody owes $1,000 and you can get them re-enrolled, you can get them to complete their degree, and maybe you get them, like Don said, to pay it forward. I think that's a good opportunity. Working with grants, I think having a good grant team and people that are out there willing to kind of work with other offices. Is your institution willing to match a grant? I think that's a good place to start with the conversation. And once again, that really ties back to the finance piece. I think your bubble at the bottom works the best. Every institution is slightly different. Some may be more tuition driven, some may be more graduation focused driven. I think there's an opportunity at every institution to make sure that we're getting students through the degree process, whatever that is, and identifying those solutions, or we don't want to call them problems. Identifying solutions to get them through the process, I think, is the best way.
Thanks, Nick. Final thought, JT. I know often when we check with students who are leaving the institution, the easy answer is it's financial and they walk out the door. As a phone-first organization reaching out to adults, do you find that finance is that brick wall, or are adults differently prepared to return?
Well, that's a good question. And Nick, we don't call them problems, we call them routes. They've got different routes back, right? um, there's more bumps on that route. Right. So but no, what we find is, I mean, you can generally in the adult student market, when you look broadly at kind of online adults, we usually find that an adult student who's 10 years removed from kind of the first try, and they're coming back, if the price per credit hour is in a certain band, they can usually figure out the money, right? So it comes down to, again, the value of education and sort of how are they going to do that now that they're further in their career and in their life. So a lot of that work is just building that value and then giving them the different routes based on the situations. And so one of the other things that when we go in, we work with institutions, is we really try to put a number next to the route, right? So meaning if you have, you may have, and institutions sit on huge databases of sort of prior students. And so there could be 20,000 students who are sort of free and clear to just come on back, right? And then there may be another group that's much smaller that, okay, well, they need the debt forgiveness, right? Because they've got a debt, right? But the important thing is that's going to vary by institution. So the biggest thing we try to do in our work is say, well, know your numbers, right? Think of the routes they're going to have to go, and then what's your count? So then you can create your strategy to fulfill it.
Thanks so much. I think this has been an extremely valuable discussion. Creative financing strategies for adult online students, findings from a rigorous qualitative research study led by Don Hostler. I want to especially thank Dawn Medley and Nick Pruitt and JT Allen for joining us today, sharing best practices. Please feel free to reach out to me, L. Schulteis at myfootpath.com, where I'm an advisor. I can route questions to Dawn and Nick directly. And please do tune in for our next sessions, which will be on deliberate planning of online enrollments and providing a very high level of concierge type service to adult students. Once again, thank you for joining us for this study brought to you by myFootpath, and we look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you.